Well, hi, we're going to talk about treatment of the GI system and particularly dysfunction as a central node of the functional medicine matrix. So my disclosures are that I am a consultant from Mend After and I'm on the scientific advisory board for nutrition dynamics. The performance objectives. We're going to review and clarify the functional medicine timeline matrix and the concepts of antecedents, triggers, and mediators. We're going to discuss the importance of understanding the patient's individual story. And then we're going to try to identify key leverage points to utilize therapeutically in the individual treatment plan. We're also going to define what this thing is we call the 5R framework. And then we're going to select and interpret certain functional medicine laboratories and how they map to the 5R program. We're going to develop an individual treatment plan with a specific patient and using this 5R plan. And then we're going to try to understand how laboratories can inform and guide implementation of the 5R plan. So as a review, remember that the GI tract is not just a sewer pipe. It is a dynamic, metabolically active system and is an integral and central node in the complex web that is called functional medicine. And dysregulation of the GI system can have profound and wide-ranging health impacts. So Dr. Hanaway went through in some detail this concept of dig in. But this is important to reiterate that the gut is not just about digestion and absorption. There's this idea of intestinal permeability and how intestinal permeability is really an initial step towards systemic disease, disparate and distant systemic disease, and how the gut microbiota and dysbiosis can have major impacts on nearly every aspect of health, and that the gut is a major place where we can impact immune modulation and inflammation. And the gut has its own nervous system called the enteric nervous system, but it also communicates with the nervous system at large, and we can have significant impacts on many aspects of health just within the gut. So remember our patient, Joan. Dr. Hughes introduced us to Joan and gave us a large story about Joan, and then Dr. Hanaway expanded on that. And then we're going to talk about her timeline and her matrix a little bit, and then we're going to try to tell her story. So remember our primary tool, the Go To It tool. We gather. So sometimes we pick the chart up out of the little holder and we see the name and we just want to clang ourselves in the head with that chart. Instead, let's gather ourselves. Let's just take a breath. Let's get centered. Let's be mindful, and let's prepare to step in to this wounded human being's sphere. And then we're going to gather information. We're going to organize that information using the timeline and the matrix and so on. And then we're going to tell. So what does that mean? We're going to tell the story. And we're going to tell the story back to the individual in our own words, not science jargon, but normal human vocabulary. And this retelling is really meant to be a dialogue. And we want to have a to and fro so that we have a clear understanding of their story. And we want to then map that story to the timeline and the matrix. But this is a story to inspire. This isn't, Dragnet and Joe Gannon and Just the Facts, Ma'am. This is Steven Spielberg. We are trying to create a dramatic, inspiring story because what we're doing is audience participation medicine. We're asking people not to simply take a passive pill, not simply take a pill. We're asking them to do things that are very complicated and very challenging, like change their diet, like start to exercise when they haven't in a long time, like figure out how to modify their sleep behaviors so that they get better rest, and so on. So mastering the story, the science and art of healing, think deeply about the context of the story and think about the physiology behind the story. Now, people will come up with goofy ideas about what's going on. Let that go. So many of our patients have been told things like that can't happen. Well, it did happen. Maybe it didn't happen from a physiological point of view the way they expressed it, but there's some kernel there that did happen to them, and we need to be the detective who figures out the connection to physiology. Be patient, allow the story to unfold. Be the audience, not the heckler, right? So listen, don't interrupt. And only when you need them to amplify a part of their story, ask questions. People are often afraid that that's just going to take too long. But the truth is, if you allow people, they will move quickly. So be inclusive, not exclusive. So, this is not acute care medicine. Somebody comes in with chest pain, and all we want to know is it chest pain? Is it crushing substernal chest pain radiating to their left arm? Do they have diaphoresis? Done. That's all the history I need. They're going to get an EKG. They're going to the cath lab. They're doing something emergent and life-saving. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is chronic complex disease. We want to understand the context of their disease so that we can extract the antecedents, the triggers, and the mediators. And look for patterns of connection. Retell the story to create meaning, connection, education, inspiration, and motivation. Because again, we're asking people to do hard things. And then assess the readiness to change. Because the best plan, if the patient isn't able or capable or ready, it will be useless, right? So, and then we try to activate nature, the greatest pharmacy of all. So, what is Joan's story and how do we tell it? Well, there are a number of ways. Here's a kind of a conventional approach. So perhaps she has seen her internist, conventional internist, and he's a fairly compassionate guy. So he says something like, Joan, you appear to have two conditions. You appear to have this thing called irritable bowel syndrome and this thing called depression. And the good news is we have an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. The antidepressant is going to help your depression, and a side effect of the antidepressant is actually going to help your irritable bowel syndrome. So I'd like you to pick up this prescription at the pharmacy, and then let's follow up in a few weeks. And if you're not really turning the corner and getting better by then, we're going to send you for a gastrointestinal workup. So that's how a conventional physician might tell this story. As we all know, often they don't. They simply hand the prescription with no explanation. In functional medicine, we tell the story differently. We think about the totality of the story, how we've pulled out the antecedents, triggers, and mediators, what this timeline looks like, and what the matrix looks like. Remember the functional medicine tree, and we're really looking to climb down the tree, right? Our subspecialty colleagues out in gastroenterology and cardiology and pulmonology are out in the twigs of the canopy. And we want to climb down the tree to get to the antecedents, triggers, mediators, the modifiable lifestyle factors, the genetic predispositions, and so on. So here are our timeline tools that you've already seen. Dr. Hughes introduced those, and the matrix tool. And here's Joan's matrix that I think both Dr. Hughes and Dr. Hanaway developed. And what I want to show you really is two things: the antecedents on the left and the patient's actual current symptoms on the right. And we want to be thinking about pulling out those antecedents. So what are those antecedents? The family history of irritable bowel syndrome, the diverticulosis, being bottle fed. Remember that the microbiome is different depending on if you're breastfed or bottle fed, and it's critical to the development of the immune system. Ear infections at an early age with multiple courses of antibiotics and then removal of a major major lymphoid organ in the throat at an early age. What about triggers? Well, she had multiple courses of antibiotics. That certainly is going to alter the microbiome. Standard American diet, also called the SAD diet. Impaired digestion by laboratory evaluation, presence of blastocystis hominis, and increased intestinal permeability. And then what are some of the mediators? Well, adiposity as sort of an inflammatory condition, depression as an inflammatory condition, and then these nutritional insufficiencies. And as we'll see as we go on, these nutritional insufficiencies may actually be magnified by some of her antecedents. A couple of the antecedents that aren't on here are both her parents' divorce and her personal divorce. So here we are back to the timeline, and we can tell this story based on the timeline or the matrix. And I'm going to go to the matrix to tell this story. And I'm going to say something like this. Joan, this is going to be a dialogue, and I'm going to kind of tell you what I heard, and I want you to correct me where I've misheard or misunderstood. But what I'm hearing is that you're here because you have this gas and bloating and abdominal pain, and you have fatigue, and you're just feeling really stressed and depressed. And I know that some of these gut problems started at a very early age, but I'm going to suggest to you that these problems actually started even before you were born. Because your mother had seasonal affective disorder, and you have a family history of irritable bowel syndrome and diverticulitis. So probably you inherited either genes or what we call epigenetic effects, which are just non-gene inheritable things. You inherited this stuff from your family. And then at a pretty early age, you had to change from breastfeeding to bottle feeding, and that changes your microbiome. The microbiome is this teeming ecology of bacteria and other microorganisms that live primarily in your gut, but all over in and on your body. And this microbiome is really important for the development of your immune system, and it interacts with your nervous system, and it's very, very critically important for our development. At a pretty early age, you had multiple ear infections, and you had antibiotics for those, and that further altered your microbiome. And it turns out that having this altered microbiome, which we call dysbiosis, can affect your mood, it can affect your memory, it can certainly affect your gut function. And then you weren't very old when your parents got divorced. And as I understand your story, that was a real major upset for you and your life. And it really puts you into a condition we call fight or flight. So when you're in fight or flight, that means you're afraid and you're ready to either, run away or fight. Well, when that happens to you, you're shunting blood away from your intestines, away from your guts, towards your muscles, so that you have the blood supply necessary to fight or flight. When that happens, you become functionally malnourished and maldigestion. Have maldigestion because you don't have the robust blood supply to your gut. Additionally, because you've altered your digestion and absorption, it alters your microbiome yet again. And 70% of your immune system lines your gut. It's called the GALT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And you're moving blood away from that part of your immune system, so you become functionally immune compromised as well. So you have all these problems layering one on top of the other, and eventually you have, your kids, and your kids are stressful. Maybe not at first, but you had postpartum depression from that, and then as they grew older into teens, they became normal, healthy, active teens, which all by itself is stressful. And that led to kind of a worsening of your symptoms. So that's how we got here. That's how we got to be sick. So how are we going to get out of this? Well, we need to reverse course, right? We need to figure out how to rebalance this thing we're calling the microbiome and get you out of fight or flight and give you ample spare parts, if you will, nutrients to rebuild yourself. So we're going to work a lot on these things we call modifiable personal lifestyle factors. So within the context of your very busy, very hectic life, we're going to help you modify things in a way that allows you to heal. So we're going to try to figure out ways to help you get more and more quality sleep and relaxation. We're going to help you find some time for yourself. You have this tremendous time commitment to your work. You have a tremendous time commitment to your family, and there's nothing left for you. And, as we say in finances, if you don't pay yourself first, you'll never save a dime. Well, if you don't schedule yourself first, you'll never have a moment of your own. So we're going to help you figure out how to carve out just a small sliver for you, a small sliver of time for you, so that you can get some healthy movement in, so that you'll have just a tad of time to make better food choices. Instead of going and waiting in line at the fast food place, we'll have you run into the grocery store to the deli where you can get much higher quality food for no more time, as an example. There'll be other things that will show you how to improve the quality of your nutrition without increasing the time commitment. And same for stress. Stress, we've already talked about how it alters your immune system and all these things. But it's often not the stressor that's the problem. It's our relationship to the stressor. So we're going to work on ways to alter your relationship to that stress. And then you're pretty isolated. You just don't have time to have socialization of any kind. And by carving out that little sliver, we hope to help you feel less isolated. So that's the big overview. It's going to involve some change. And change is always hard. But we're going to coach you through it. We're going to be with you. It's going to be a partnership. So that's how I would tell her story. And why am I doing this? Because, again, there are so many influences that can trigger and increase intestinal permeability. And that results in a variety of changes that result in systemic disease and even autoimmunity. And here are some references to these ideas about intestinal permeability. I'm not going to go through them, but I want you to see that there's information here. All right, so order. We need to order our priorities and then order tests and things like that. Well, some tests have already been done and you've seen those. So one of our priorities, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise, start in the gut, right? And every presenter today, I think, has said that. Treatment approaches for gut dysbiosis, the 5R program. Now, the 5R program is this conceptual framework that we can just sort of hang things on. We can start to build a program by adding to each of the 5 R's. And it's a systematized approach to help normalize critical gastrointestinal function. So the 5R, what are these 5R? Remove, bad stuff. Replace, good stuff. Reinoculate, meaning rebuild a healthy, diverse microbiome. Repair, give nutrients and phytonutrients and botanicals that help the body repair. And then rebalance the lifestyle so that they don't just relapse. So we're going to ask really 5 fundamental questions. What needs to be removed? What do we need to replace? How do we build this teeming ecology of the microbiome? What do we need to reinoculate? What nutrients are required to repair? And then finally, how to rebalance the lifestyle so that they don't just relapse. So remove. We want to remove things that, foods particularly, that the patient is sensitive to, intolerant to, or allergic to. We want to remove pathogenic or other dysbiotic imbalanced bacteria, fungi, or parasites. We want to remove environmental stressors or pollutants and just plain stressors. So how might we do that? Well, an elimination diet, an oligoantigenic elimination diet, antimicrobials of some kind, and then removing toxins and stressors. What about replace? Well, we want to replace factors that may be inadequate or lacking. So digestive factors, such as hydrochloric acid, pancreatic enzymes, bile acids, fibers, things like that. Then reinoculate. The truth is that probiotics don't actually colonize. They're placeholders. They're important placeholders because between the time that we start to get rid of the bad things and the time that we actually are able to foster the growth of good things, there's opportunity for nature to fill voids. So we want to fill those voids with probiotics. And then we give prebiotics. Prebiotics are fertilizers, if you will, for the probiotics. And then there are these things called symbiotics, which are simply mixtures of probiotics and prebiotics. And if our goal is to create a diverse, robust microbiome, we need to provide diverse, robust amounts of prebiotics as well. So what about repair? We want to provide the nutrients that the body needs. We need to provide the spare parts, if you will. So a broad array of nutritional support. Mucosal lining support like phosphatidylcholine. Mucosal secretion protectants like plantain or polysaccharides. Support for the GALT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, so lactoferrin, lactoperoxide, whey immune globulins, colostrum, serum-derived bovine immune globulins, egg-derived immune globulins, and so forth. Antioxidants known to function in the gut, such as green tea extracts like the catechins, or nutritional and phytonutritional anti-inflammatories like curcumin. Curcumin is a great anti-inflammatory, but it's not absorbed well. Well, that means it stays in the gut, which means it's a great thing to use in the gut. And then fish oils and things like that. What about rebalance? Well, I already mentioned scheduling, right? If you don't schedule yourself, you'll never have a moment of your own. Mindfulness eating, making better choices, stopping when you're actually full, heart rate variability biofeedback to get you out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. Yoga, meditation, prayer, breathing, or other centering practices. Even just standing in the morning dew in your bare feet can be a centering practice, not to mention that it can normalize excess electrons, which means oxidative stress. And then psychotherapy or counseling or other things like that. So how can we use the 5R program to help Joan? Well, so we're going to initiate assessment and care. So if we just start with one of our tools, which is the medical symptoms questionnaire, this is the second page, we notice that under digestive tract, there are 19, the score is 19. Well, the total score is 64, so nearly a third of Joan's symptoms are in her gut. So clearly she needs some help there. So what does she need to remove? Well, let's take a look. And don't forget, we have lots of tools here. We've got nutritional assessment tools. The ABCDs of nutritional evaluation is in the toolkit. Various gather, organize, and initiate forms. And then we have a number of therapeutic dietary interventions. So let's take a closer look at those. We have first the idea that food is not just energy, it's not just calories, it's information, it's connection, right? We break bread together, and it's medicine. We have our fundamental nutritional plans, the core food plan, and then we have a core food vegan and core food vegetarian plan, and then this phytonutrient spectrum handouts, which just talks about the nutrient diversity kind of based on color. Then we have our first step interventions, whether it's cardiometabolic food plan or the elimination food plan. And then we have some more advanced interventions like the MITO food plan, which is for mitochondrial resuscitation, detox food plan, helping with more specifically for detoxification, anti-candida food plan, low FODMAP food plan. We're going to choose, for this case, the elimination diet. And we're going to do that because, frankly, foods are an unrecognized issue for many people's health. And while here it says you should consider it in anyone who hasn't been successful with conventional medical care, I would argue that it should be tried in everyone. All of your patients should get at least one carefully thought out application of an elimination diet. And the way I explain it is I want you to do this elimination with your body, mind, heart, and soul. And I want you to do it for 6 weeks. So here it talks about doing it for a minimum of 3 weeks. Well, it takes 3 weeks to clear the food antigens and all that business. I want another 3 weeks to heal the gut. And why? Because it helps heal the gut and improve the microbiome. It reduces food triggers and it helps you identify food triggers. It reduces inflammation. It reduces toxic burdens. It improves inflammation, reduces inflammation, and it gives you a body awareness of food reactions. And most importantly, it's not calorie restricted. You know, most people are used to putting, this much meat on their plate and that much carbohydrate on their plate and that much vegetable on their plate. And so on this elimination diet, they keep the same amount of protein and the same amount of vegetable, and they have a big empty space, and they think they're starving. And the answer to, oh my God, I'm starving on this diet is, well, eat more. All right. So tomorrow, we're going to go in, Dr. Bowen is going to go into diet prescription in great detail, and she's going to go specifically into the elimination diet. And here are some references to the elimination diet. Again, just so you know, and you can look this up, this is science-based. More references. And there are some tools in your toolkit. So there is a comprehensive practitioner's guide to the elimination diet. And then there are these tools for patients. So this is the front and back of the elimination diet food plan, and you can make little check marks and so on. And it tells them, which foods are high in histamine, which foods are nightshades, which foods are fermented, and so on. So, you can emphasize one direction or another. So why do we do this elimination diet? Well, what part of the functional medicine matrix might an elimination diet touch? And the answer is all of it. An elimination diet reduces inflammation. It supports healthy microbiome. It's gluten-free and dairy-free. It's phytonutrient dense. It reduces toxic burden. As I said, it's not calorie restricted. It promotes this body awareness to food reactions, and it identifies food triggers. In fact, the gold standard for food allergy is actually an elimination provocation diet. So this is actually the gold standard for finding food sensitivities, allergies, etc. And people say, it's so hard to do an elimination diet. It's actually, well, I should say it's simple. It's not necessarily easy, but it is simple. But it does require planning. The problem is most people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan, right? So you got to plan your work and work your plan. So more discussion by Dr. Bowen about the comprehensive elimination diet in the presentation about prescribing an elimination diet. And you need to experience this. You need to do this. If you're well, you need to take 3 weeks and do the elimination diet. And I kind of guarantee you that even though you feel well, you'll probably feel better. And if you're not well, you should do an elimination diet for 6 weeks and then carefully reintroduce foods, one new food at a time, as will be explained. The reason why is because you need to understand the difficulties that people go through doing the elimination diet. And once you've done it yourself, you will be better able to, number one, resist their idea that it's so hard, I just can't do it. And number two, help them and coach them and support them. So the patient came with some labs. They had their primary care doctor had done a CBC. Well, that was normal. So that tells me that their mean corpuscular volume was normal. They didn't have hypersegmented white cells. So probably their B vitamins are sort of okay, at least sort of okay. Ferritin 75 is okay. TSH 2.1, it's okay. Vitamin D 47. Well, there are some hardliners who say no, it has to be 50 or above. To me, 47 is pretty good. You know, the lab will tell you 30 and above is good. I think it should be close to 50. 47 is pretty close to 50. The gastroenterologist helped us out. The total IgA was normal. The tissue transglutaminase IgA was negative. The deaminated gliadin was negative. The endomycel antibody was negative. And the small intestine bacterial overgrowth breath test was normal. So what does that mean? Can we rule out celiac disease? So I think that these labs mean that celiac disease is unlikely, but it's not ruled out. And I think we need to be mindful of that. It's not ruled out. What about ruling out wheat allergy? We haven't even begun to assess that. Those labs mean nothing about wheat allergy, and they mean nothing about non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So what do we need to remove? And remember the things that we're trying to remove. So let's look deeper at her stool test. We found 3 of 3 samples containing blastocystis. So what do we know about blastocystis? And could it be related to any of Joan's symptoms? Well, the first thing we learn is that blastocystis is very common. In fact, a DNA analysis revealed that about 50% of healthy adults in highly industrialized countries and about 100% of Senegalese children can carry blastocystis. In one lab evaluation showed that 23.5% of all stool samples, regardless of reason, carried at least one parasite. And the most common of those parasites was blastocystis. So here's some references for how common is blastocystis. So is blastocystis a pathogen? Well, here's a study where they found that about 550 people in a large population cross-section had the single protozoa blastocystis. But only about 230 of them, so just under half of them, were actually symptomatic. Now, 43 of those individuals were treated with metronidazole, and all of them got better. So it appears there's some kind of differential pathogenicity. And why might that be? There's a couple of reasons. The first is it depends on the state of the microbiome and the state of the health of the gut milieu. And does this patient have leaky gut, and what other stressors and inflammation and so on are present? And here are some references to those ideas. And then the other idea is that there are different subtypes of blastocystis. There are at least 17. And these 17 subtypes appear to have different levels of pathogenicity. So what are the symptoms when it is symptomatic? Well, it can give IBS-like symptoms. And they can also have cutaneous symptoms such as urticaria. They can also have this weird, intense palmar-plantar itching. They can have mast cell degranulation issues with increased histamine release. They can have short-term exacerbations with die-off when you treat them, such as Herxheimer reactions. But let's go back for a minute to this idea of mast cell degranulation. It's all the rage right now to diagnose our patients with mast cell abnormalities, right? And so we diagnose, well, they've got a mast cell activation syndrome, and we put them on antihistamines and H2 blockers and mast cell stabilizers and maybe even steroids. But the real question is not, do they have mast cell degranulation issues? The question is, why are their mast cells so irritable? And it turns out that blastocystis is one of the possible reasons, and there are many others. So always remember the question, why? At least 3 levels of why. So why is this person sick? Oh, they have blastocystis. Well, why do they have blastocystis? Right? Or, oh, they have mast cell degranulation. Well, why do they have mast cell degranulation? Oh, they have blastocystis. Well, why do they have blastocystis? If we always ask why at least 3 times, we get to a deeper level of understanding. And here's an example of a test where there on the top, you see blastocystis detected, and then it reflexes to subtypes. Frankly, I don't do this test because if I find blastocystis in a symptomatic patient, it's the blastocystis until proven otherwise, which means I treat it. I do a test to be for proof of eradication. And if they're still sick, sorry, blastocystis, it wasn't your fault, and we move on. But if they are better, then we're all happy. So blastocystis exhibits host specificity and strain-to-strain variability in the pathogenicity. And various subtypes have different degrees of pathogenicity, and they also have different global distributions. But the fact that blastocystis can increase intestinal permeability in patients suggests that it can be pathogenic and cause systemic consequences. It can degrade immune globulin A, it can inhibit the inducible form of nitric oxide, and it can upregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines. So can protozoal infection increase intestinal permeability? And the quick answer is yes. We don't have a lot of data on blastocystis, but certainly several protozoa can. And here is more evidence of protozoal infection and intestinal permeability. So mast cell deficient mice, so co-infection in mast cell deficient mice was associated with reduction in gut permeability and bacteria. So this study is simply telling us that there are a variety of things that can trigger increased intestinal permeability, and among them is protozoa. But is inflammation linked to an increased intestinal permeability? We know that these things certainly cause inflammation. And the quick and easy answer to that is yes. And how? Well, we've got toxins and stressors and dysbiotic organisms which can increase intestinal permeability. Increased intestinal permeability results in leakage of lipopolysaccharides and other inflammatory factors across or between the endothelium, and that results in inflammation. And that inflammation, of course, increases our likelihood to have allergic, autoimmune, or other systemic pathologies. And that, in turn, increases our inflammatory cytokines, which further increases leakiness, which further increases leakage of lipopolysaccharides and inflammatory factors, etc. So it becomes this feed-forward loop. And here are some references surrounding inflammation and depression. And in fact, intestinal mucosal dysfunction characterized by increased lipopolysaccharide translocation may induce specific sick behaviors, including depression. And how is that and why is that? Well, here we are. This is Joan's case, right? And here is her timeline again. So how do we get rid of these bugs? Well, here are some pharmaceutical ideas. And I think the takeaway here is that when I was in school, we treated almost everything with Flagyl 250 TID. Well, as you see here, the more recent recommendations are Flagyl 750 TIV, and in some cases you need to use Flagyl and a sulfa drug simultaneously. So it's really important to do the test, find the bug, treat the bug, redo the test to make sure the bug's gone. Here are a few other recommendations for other parasitic infections, and some more. And then botanicals. So the usual suspects, black walnut, wormwood, bitterwood, garlic, so on. My favorite being wormwood because Artemisia is the active ingredient in absinthe. And here are some specific dosing recommendations. And the caution I'll make is that I recommend you use the Artemisia as a supplement because it's an awful lot of bottles of absinthe to get the therapeutic dose. Is there anything else with Joan we need to remove? Well, here's another piece of her CDSA, her stool and digestive analysis. And we notice there are some commensal, they call them commensal here. I would prefer the term imbalanced flora. So alpha hemolytic strep, gamma hemolytic strep. It doesn't seem like a good thing to have bugs in our gut that would hemolyze our red blood cells. And then we also have Klebsiella and Pseudomonas. Below is the yeast culture, and we have 2 species of yeast. And while these are considered normal flora at these concentrations, it's somewhat hard to culture yeast. And I would argue that yeast are a bit like cockroaches. If you see one, there's probably more. So I'm probably going to treat their yeast as well. So what do we know about dysbiosis in Joan? Does Joan even have dysbiosis? What is dysbiosis? Well, we're not really thinking about a classical infection in this case. What we're really thinking about is more of an imbalance. So dysbiosis in one individual might present as dermatitis, but a very similar microbial imbalance in another person might manifest as peripheral neuropathy or some inflammatory arthritis or any other thing. So really, when we're working with people with autoimmune disease or inflammatory issues, we're often seeing a pathogenic inflammation to a non-pathogenic microbe or to an imbalance of microbes. So there's really a continuum. And on one end of the continuum, we have a lack of healthy bacteria. On the other hand, we have an excess of bacteria, even to the point of having pathogens. But if you think about it another way, it's not really so linear, because if you have a lack of one, that space is going to be occupied and you're going to have an excess of another. So think about the dynamic concept of balance. So on one side, we're going to use diet and fermented foods and soluble fibers and prebiotics and probiotics. And on the excess side, we're going to do all of those things, but we're also going to be thinking about some kind of antimicrobial, hopefully targeted by testing, and some kind of antifungal or something like that. So I'm putting it another way, we're going to seed and feed the deficiencies, and we're going to weed the excesses. And we're going to do that because the same things that cause intestinal permeability can result in dysbiosis. And here are some references to this concept of dysbiosis. So what about weeding? What do we mean when we say weeding? Remove bacteria, remove yeast, remove protozoa. So antimicrobials for bacteria, yeast, protozoal infection should be used carefully. We really want to start gently and only use these more powerful interventions when there's a recalcitrant situation. So we would like to use laboratory stool culture assessments showing elevated pathogenic bacterias. And if we do, then that should result in some kind of antimicrobial intervention along with the dietary, lifestyle, and supplement interventions such as probiotics and prebiotics. And again, removing bacteria. If we have potentially pathogenic bacteria, we want to do the dietary intervention, we want to do the supplement intervention, and we want to use antimicrobials really targeted based on not only the culture, but hopefully even sensitivities. We want to try to be as specific as possible because antimicrobials tend to be wholesale. They kill everything, and we don't want to kill everything, which is why I often prefer starting with some kind of immune globulin product, whether it's colostrum or serum-derived bovine immune globulins or egg-derived immune globulins, something like that. So again, reiteration, if you're going to use botanicals, you probably need to use them longer, 6 to 12 weeks, and pharmaceuticals you can use shorter term. And again, just reiterating, let's remember, because of the risk of antimicrobial resistance, we want to use these things judiciously, we want to use them in a focused way, and we want to use them for the shortest duration possible. And when treating bacteria, that post-treatment evaluation, I can't tell you how many people have come to my office and said, well, I had X and I got treated for it. And we do a new stool analysis to see where we're sitting, and that same exact infection is still present. They never did a post-treatment evaluation. So here's a summary of the remove for bacteria. This is kind of one of those slides you can print and put in a little folder on your desk to remember this stuff. And the summary for yeast. When removing yeast, yeast is a little harder to culture. So a lot of times we're really going to need to use the total picture, not just the culture, but the symptoms and the signs. And our treatment is going to be a low carbohydrate diet, trying to starve the bugs, probiotics, but we're going to withhold probably prebiotics, because prebiotic can be fertilizer for the yeast as well. And we may need to use antifungals. So these antifungals, generally we want to start with topical, even though it's taken orally, it's a topical, non-systemically absorbed antifungal such as nystatin. These antifungal treatments you need to last probably 4 to 8 weeks. And then we should reserve using the systemic antifungals for the really recalcitrant cases. Because yeast dysbiosis is difficult to objectively evaluate by laboratory, follow-up may or may not be useful, and you may have to use other means, such as an organic acid test or something like that. And here is that summary slide for yeast, and you can print this and put it on in your folder on your desk. What about parasites? Treatment of parasite infection should probably best treated with pharmaceuticals. However, you use the tools you have. If you don't have pharmaceuticals at your disposal, well, then use botanicals or nutraceuticals. Then, you need to treat them for a while. If you're going to treat them with botanicals or nutraceuticals, probably 6 to 12 weeks. And then use laboratory as proof of eradication. And here's the summary for removing parasites. Again, the thing you can kind of keep on your desk as a reminder. So, remove, the summary for Joan. So what are we going to do? Well, we're certainly going to think about removing foods, and we're going to remove parasites. And we're going to do that with an elimination diet and more than likely some anti-parasitic infection. So this is the end of part 1. We'll see you during part 2, where we begin the discussion of replace.